Hello and welcome to Scott's Views. Been a while since I've done a video. I've been, well, enjoying Christmas and New Year, and I've been writing a novel for the last couple of years, so I've been busy with that, editing, and so I haven't really had much inclination to do any videos. But the last couple of days I have been discussing the psy-op, mass formation psychosis, menticide, schizogenesis, etc. On the Rowan Croft's Gran Torino from Ireland show last night on the 10th of January, I think it's the 11th of the day, and Dr. Jules Gnomes from Church Militant got in touch with me regarding the issue, and he was writing an article about it, and so it's been in my mind, so I thought I may as well just strike while the iron is hot, because it's related to a lot of the readings that I've been doing, and I was maybe thinking of doing two videos, one on the book that it's called That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis, which I've read during the holidays, which I've always been meaning to read. There is a book by Melvin Tinker, I think his name is Tinker, Melvin, called That Hideous Strength. He talks about cultural Marxism, etc. But the novel by C.S. Lewis is very interesting, and also a book that I'm reading called Spiritual Depression: Its Causes and Cures by Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, who is he's dead now, a Welsh preacher, and very interesting book. And so my basic thrust of why I wanted to talk about these two books, hopefully I won't have to quote anything from them. I'll try to summarise it in my own words. You know, you can check out the books for yourself. I think they're very interesting, but it's ignited my thinking on a lot of things. That Hideous Strength, written in 1945 by C.S. Lewis, is extremely interesting because it depicts essentially a kind of deep state organisation called NICE. They're kind of eugenicists. They are not democratically elected. Scientists, intellectuals, politicians, etc. And they want to control the population, wipe out certain parts of the population, and use science and certain technologies and very occultist, satanic kind of ideology of, you know, bringing heaven on earth, you know, their utopia on earth, so to speak. And it's a battle between good and evil with this other group in the book. It's quite interesting when you consider the COVID-19 narrative and the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, United Nations, Agenda 21, 2030, the climate agenda. If you read That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis, it's quite evident that C.S. Lewis must have had insight into the workings of these nefarious organisations working in the background, beyond democracy, beyond political mechanisms that the ordinary people are privy to. And so what can one say about more about this book? Well, it shows you that at the higher echelons of society, these people who are pulling the strings see us as merely useful or useless eaters, so to speak. And there's life is regarded as us ordinary people are regarded with great disdain, essentially. You can see this in the rhetoric of people like Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, the Nicola Sturgeon. We talk about people who are not taking the vaccine for COVID-19. Sturgeon says we're irresponsible and selfish. Trudeau says we're bigots, racists, misogynists, and Macron says we're non-citizens. French people are non-citizens for not taking the vaccine. And social media is awash with this idea of that people should have their bodily integrity taken away against their will. The fascisms. So this group NICE in C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength, it's essentially an extremely fascist, dark, sinister, occultist organisation working in the background. But in the book, if you read it, they don't succeed. Good prevails over this evil organisation. And what it shows in the book is this scientism, the god of science, this group NICE. This very much like the World Economic Forum, the sort of the AI, artificial intelligence agenda, human augmentation put forward by the UK government and other governments, the idea that we should use mRNA technology, etc., to interface with our biologies, for the use of super soldiers, the eradication of diseases, alter supposedly genetic defects, the use of nanotechnology to interface with our neural networks. It's all in C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength. And there is also this idea of scientism, which is prevalent at the moment with the COVID-19 thing. And it was occurring, of course, before. I've talked about in my other videos about mental healthism. And this is where Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones comes in his book. You see, the psy-op's been used in this in the COVID-1984 scenario to deliberately make us fearful, to make us mentally unwell, uncertain. And we have, and I'll talk about this in a little bit regarding mass formation psychosis, menticide, but we have been, a lot of people have been inculcated into a mental health crisis, so to speak. I mean, the crises were existing beforehand because, for various reasons, but the inculcation in schools of resilience, mental well-being classes for children is the idea of problematizing the human mind, being obsessed with the psyche. And I think that's always been problematic. And of course, Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones takes this up in a lot of the chapters. He talks about the rise of science. He talks about the rise of psychology, academic, modern psychology, and how, in actual fact, from a Christian point of view, from the kind of occultist point of view, which a lot of these organisations like NICE and the Hideous Strength, who the Agenda 21 2030, the whole agenda is to make us, inculcate us into problematizing the mind. in a way where we see our minds as kind of machines to be manipulated. I mean, you think it's no mistake. It's not. I don't think it's a mistake. The last few decades, the rise in the new variants of antidepressants, the SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they have been used essentially to numb the population. So many people are hooked on these antidepressants, especially since 2020, since the COVID thing happened. The prescriptions have skyrocketed. It's quite clear that I'm not demonising anyone who's taken these drugs. Sometimes there's a place for a drug to get you through a hard time, but there is a very nefarious, sinister aspect to the use of these drugs. You know, because so many people in the population who are on them, so they've been confronted with this COVID 1984. How do they respond to it? Well, indifference. You know, it's like Soma out of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and it's also like the book Insatiability by the Polish author, I forgot his name. He talks about the pill of Murty Bing. Czeslaw Miłosz talks about it in his book The Captive Mind. Essentially, faced with a tyranny, people in society are faced with a choice of going along with it or rejecting it. And what's better, easier to take the pill of Murty Bing? But the danger you go insane. You can't keep it up. But anyways, Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones in his book Spiritual Depression highlights this idea of, I'm not going to go into detail about it, but getting away from a kind of modern psychological approach to dealing with mental distress. This obsession with the mind, focusing on the past, focusing on the future. He goes into it in very, very specific and complex detail from a biblical Christian perspective, how that is anti-Christian. You know, the modern psychological way is anti-Christian. It's a way of taking up one's attention, distracting oneself, and it's offering oneself up to the god of scientism or science as being a saviour. And of course, as people have spoken, including myself, regarding the psy-op of COVID 1984, you have this, it came upon us, COVID 1984, at a time where for many decades the idea of a spirituality or a Christian sensibility has been carved out for many, many decades, with the idea of science and AI, genetic engineering, etc., has been put into place, and a concerted attack on Christianity. And so this brings us on to this idea of mass formation psychosis has been a lot in the media. Specifically, Robert Malone, the inventor of the mRNA technology, has talked about it in terms of the Belgian academic Matthias Desmet, if I pronounced that correctly. And it's doing the rounds. It's doing the rounds. And there's lots of different reasons. One can say, well, why is it doing the rounds? Why is it doing the rounds? I think, well, because the fact checkers at the moment are going, Reuters, what is the other organisation? Associated Press. They've been trying to debunk the idea that we've been under some sort of psychological operation. But as I've said and talked about today and yesterday, they are being willfully ignorant of the actual facts. One, it's quite obvious governments like the UK government, with the psychologists of Spy B, have had a programme of applied psychology and propaganda to affect how people in the population are feeling about things, to direct the narrative, to program people to live in a certain way, to adhere to strict restrictions. And but they're also ignorant of history. I mean, this is not, what I've talked about in terms of menticide, schizogenesis, and Desmet talks about in terms of mass formation psychosis. It's old news. I mean, you've got the history of Eastern communism, the use of Pavlovianism in China and the USSR. You the use of propaganda described by Jacques Ellul and Bernays, the nephew of Freud. So these fact checkers, they can't deny this is happening. The only reason I can think they may be doing this is because the cat is out the bag and they can't put it back in, and people will be looking for scalps about this. And it's very interesting. Laura Dodsworth's book, State of Fear. I've talked about this as well in an article I wrote, Beyond the State of Fear, on my website. And the psychologists in the book, the testimony of them, I don't think it was quite credible. Having been in academic psychology departments, I know about ethics committees and how studies and research gets signed off. It's very, very difficult to get ethics approval to do a study, a very simple study, for example, for a student, an undergraduate, to get to press buttons on a computer in response to teddy bears and lizards, for example. The ethics committee will be very worried about the trauma on the person doing the experiment. How will we protect them, and how will we debrief them, and what measures are in place if they're distressed. So these professors and academics on Spy B of Sage, suddenly lying in bed at night, as described in Dodsworth's book, that they felt they might have been, how did they get into this unethical position of making people scared? I don't buy it. Interestingly, well, Dodsworth is not a psychologist, but interestingly, she has written in recent articles, talking about how the vaccine rollout has been a success, and we should be pleased about that, and maybe we should have an inquiry in how psychology is used. The thing is, if one is questioning this state of fear that's been induced, and there's no need for it, and it's unethical perhaps from her perspective, well, why would you need a vaccine rollout? What's this mass vaccination celebration for? So it's very strange. It's very strange how. So I question what's going on in the narrative, even on both sides. The pro-COVID vaccine rollout narrative, pro-restrictions, versus even the people critiquing it. I mean, Robert Malone. Whereas I welcome this information being put out there, and he's made warnings about the vaccine and how Omicron's not very serious, etc. But Robert Malone, he actually took the vaccine himself, which is very interesting. But anyhow, but this lockstep narrative about this the idea that we haven't been psy-oped, so to speak. It's like it's lockstep narrative on the mainstream media side, but it's just not true. They are lying, essentially. It has happened. So the cat is out the bag, and it's got to be a very interesting time to see where this goes. But when you look at books like That Hideous Strength, the C.S. Lewis, and if you read that book, you can see the similarities of these organisations like the World Health Organization, the kind of the COP26 climate agenda, the scientism, following the science, a godless science at that. And then when you go to Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones and spiritual depression, its causes and cures, and see how the human psyche has been moved with these nefarious agendas to take us away from a spiritual way of seeing our human being. It is quite striking. We were living in very interesting times, and I hear that Nicola Sturgeon will be making an announcement this afternoon, running about now actually, and how she wants to have an independence referendum by 2023. But with the seems to be the caveat we should all be in masks until then. The relinquishing of this power, it is a hideous strength that's been unleashed upon us. You know, people like Nicola Sturgeon want to keep us in the thrall of fear. And of course, Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones talks about in his book, that is the most satanic thing. You know, of course, in the Bible, he talks about, he quotes from different parts of Scripture. We should not be walking in fear. But if you notice the narrative, they're always wanting to bring us back to the fear. They're always wanting to make us submit to the scientism. They don't want us to be living in glory of what is. And coming from someone like Sturgeon and her adoration of queer theory, and this very totalitarian, tyrannical way of seeing her subjects, us, I find it very, very, very dark. Because it is, we are battling, as I said in my other videos, we're battling against principalities of powers and darkness. In the sadomasochism of Sturgeon and her ilk, you know, keeping children in masks, that is no accident. It's no accident she says things like, when the rollout of the vaccine for children was approved, it made her heart sing. She knew fine well there was warning signals from Pfizer and other drug companies about myocarditis, pericarditis, etc. And of course, the long-term mask use, people are suffering, and it's doing people's health no good at all. I know some people who've been wearing masks for 2 years now, they've developed lung problems, and Sturgeon wants to keep us in them. Guantanamo Bay wore the same masks that people are wearing nowadays. Why did they give people, the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, face masks to use? So there are psychological reasons, humiliation, stopping the prisoners getting facial cues from each other, but there was also the slight reduction in breathing efficiency. They know exactly what they're doing, and it's evil. It's not based in science. It's based in that hideous strength, and to bring us to spiritual depression. So I'll leave it there. Take care. Speak soon.